I met Claire on one of those crisp, early spring evenings when the city still feels like it's waking up from winter. I was at a networking event, something I used to hate but forced myself to attend for the sake of growing my business. I run a logistics company, nothing glamorous, but it's mine. I'd been at it for a few years at that point, still in that grind phase where every handshake and business card mattered. Claire wasn't in logistics. She was there with a friend from a marketing agency. She stood out right away, confident, sharp, dressed like she belonged in a magazine spread, but somehow still completely at ease. I offered her a drink, and she smiled and said she only accepted drinks from guys who didn't talk about themselves too much. I laughed, told her she was tough, and ended up talking with her for the rest of the night. Things moved quickly. Within a few months, we were seeing each other regularly, then living together not long after. Claire had a marketing job she enjoyed, and I was pouring myself into building my team and expanding operations. We found a rhythm. Weekday dinners together, shared morning routines, occasional weekend getaways. She brought energy into my life that I didn't realize I'd been missing. We got married about 2 years after we met. Small ceremony, close family and friends. Claire planned most of it. She was a natural at organizing the details without letting the stress show. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have someone so pulled together, someone who didn't just love me but seemed to believe in me. Eventually, we bought a house together, a 2-story place with clean lines, a wide-open kitchen Claire was obsessed with, and enough room for the life we were building. We hadn't started talking about kids seriously yet. Claire always said she wanted to wait until things settled a little, and I agreed. There was no rush. We were still young, still growing into the life we wanted. Our day-to-day was full but balanced. I was managing a team of about 20 at the office, drivers, dispatchers, support staff, while Claire kept things running smoothly at home and in her own career. We'd meet for lunch once or twice a week. She'd stop by the office every so often, and the team loved her, especially the younger guys. Claire had this charisma that made people feel at ease, and I loved watching her in those moments. She made me feel proud, like I'd chosen well. Looking back now, it all seemed so simple then. Easy, even. We were a couple that worked. At least, that's how I saw it. Our life found a rhythm that suited us. I'd wake up around 6 to check emails and get a jump on the day, and Claire would roll out of bed about an hour later, usually in one of my old t-shirts, hair pulled up, already scanning her phone for messages from her team. We'd cross paths in the kitchen, me with my coffee, her with her green smoothie, and exchange half-awake kisses before going our separate ways. It wasn't dramatic or overly romantic, just real, lived in. Claire was sharp when it came to her work. She had a way of organizing chaos, whether it was managing a brand campaign or making sure our home never missed a bill, an event, or a social obligation. I admired that. She never really slowed down, but it didn't feel like she was trying to prove anything. She just moved fast, thought fast, lived fast. I was more measured. I worked long hours too, but I always made time to breathe. Claire thrived in the busy. We spent our weekends recharging. Saturday mornings were usually coffee on the patio and some kind of errand run. Home store, grocery store, maybe an open house or two just for fun. Claire liked looking at houses, even when we weren't planning on buying. She said it helped her think. Sunday afternoons were for laundry, cleaning up, grilling in the backyard. Sometimes we'd invite friends over. Claire was a great host, friendly, efficient, always had the right wine or playlist ready. I handled the grill. That was our balance. We didn't fight often. And when we did, it was over the usual stuff, how much time I was spending at work, how often she forgot to unplug from her phone, or how one of us forgot to call back a relative. But nothing explosive. No drama. We'd cool off, talk it through, move on. I always thought that was a sign of how solid we were. We didn't make problems bigger than they had to be. We worked through them. Claire and I had built a home that felt like ours. Clean lines, warm lighting, framed prints from our travels. The dining table she picked out from some boutique in the city, the couch we picked out together after sitting on every option in the store. There was a kind of pride in it, not in a showy way, but in the comfort it gave us. Our life had structure, familiarity, forward motion. And when she curled up next to me on the couch at the end of a long day, or leaned over to kiss me on the cheek while I was focused on my laptop, I felt it. This quiet assurance that we were exactly where we were supposed to be. If you asked me back then what kind of marriage Claire and I had, I would have said it was the kind most people hope for. Not movie perfect or full of grand gestures, but real, functional. We respected each other. We worked hard. We laughed often. There was comfort in our routines, and I genuinely believed we were growing together, not just existing side by side, but evolving with each season of life. Our social circle was a mix of old friends and new ones, some from Claire's side, some from mine, and a few couples we'd met through mutual acquaintances or work events. Claire had this way of making an impression on people. She'd remember the details others forgot: birthdays, allergies, that story someone told about their vacation 3 years ago. People liked being around her, and I liked being the man next to her in those moments, quietly proud. My team at work knew her, too. She'd drop by during office lunches or bring coffee on days when she knew I was slammed. It wasn't frequent, just enough to be familiar. Some of the younger guys would joke around with her, nothing inappropriate, just playful. She was outgoing, witty, easy to talk to, and I never thought twice about it. She was my wife. They were my employees. We were all just people, getting through our days. At home, she kept things running smoothly. From meal planning to the decor changes that seemed to happen seasonally, Claire had a vision for everything. She'd send me links to new lamps, rugs, chairs, most of which I barely noticed when they arrived, but I always acted impressed. She loved creating a space that felt alive, updated. I admired that about her. She wanted the place to reflect our life, not just hold it. And there were quiet moments, too, the ones I thought meant the most. Sunday nights curled up on the couch, both of us half watching a show while scrolling on our phones. Quick touches in passing, a hand on my back, her feet in my lap. Sometimes she'd fall asleep before the credits rolled, and I'd just sit there, letting the moment hold me for a while before carrying her to bed. We talked about the future often. Kids, maybe in another year or two. Expanding the business. Claire was curious about starting something of her own, too. She talked about design, maybe getting into staging homes or opening a boutique. I told her she'd be incredible at it. I meant it. I really believed we were in it for the long haul. I thought we were aligned. Two people building a shared life, facing forward, hand in hand. I didn't realize how far off course we'd already drifted. It's strange how quickly familiarity can turn into uncertainty. One moment you feel secure in your life, and then little details start tugging at the edges, fraying things you never thought to question. That's how it started for me. Not with a single moment, but with dozens of tiny ones that didn't fit the pattern. Claire had always been busy, but lately, her calendar seemed packed with last-minute plans. Happy hours with friends I'd never heard of, late work dinners, weekend errands that turned into full-day outings. I didn't think much of it at first. She was social, driven, always juggling a dozen things. But it started to feel curated, like she was performing a version of herself for someone else, not just living. She became more private with her phone. It wasn't obvious at first, just small shifts, turning the screen away when a message popped up, leaving the room to take certain calls. Her phone used to be an afterthought, left on the nightstand or tossed into her bag. Now it was glued to her hand. Locked, silent, never far. I'd ask casual questions. Who were you meeting up with? Everything okay at work? And she'd always have answers, quick and polished. Too polished. Sometimes she'd smile like she was humoring me. You don't need to keep tabs on me, she joked one night. I laughed along with her, but something in her tone stuck with me. She also started putting more effort into getting ready, even for simple outings. Makeup on point, hair done, clothes that leaned a little more daring than practical. I mentioned it once, just playfully. You look great. Big meeting. And she brushed it off. A girl can't look good for herself? Of course she could. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the attention she used to save for me was being redirected somewhere else. There was one night I came home a little earlier than expected. I'd left a meeting that wrapped quicker than I thought and figured I'd surprise her. The house was dark when I walked in. She wasn't there. I called her. Straight to voicemail. An hour later she walked in, shopping bags in hand. Said she'd stopped by a boutique and lost track of time. She looked surprised to see me. Like she hadn't expected me there. I didn't say anything. Not really. Just nodded and helped her unpack the groceries she picked up on the way. But something about that night stayed with me. Not because she was late, or unreachable, or even because of how she looked at me, but because of how carefully she avoided looking at me. I didn't have proof. I didn't have accusations. I just had a feeling. And it wasn't going away. There was a time not so long ago when I would have brushed it all off. The late nights, the vague answers, the new clothes, the laughter that didn't quite reach me anymore. I used to trust the rhythm of our life without thinking twice. But now, every detail felt loaded. Every change pressed a little deeper into my gut. Claire started staying out later. Sometimes it was with friends, other times work-related. Her reasons were always reasonable. That was the thing. She never gave me anything to argue with. Her stories held up. They made sense, but they didn't feel right. She'd come home too cheerful or too tired, and she never came to bed at the same time as me anymore. Either she'd be asleep when I got in, or still up on her phone long after I drifted off. We stopped having real conversations. Not because we were fighting, but because there just wasn't anything between us anymore. Small talk, surface stuff. She'd tell me about a sale at a store. I'd mention a client win. Nothing deep. Nothing that made us feel like a couple. She'd ask about my day out of obligation, and I'd answer just enough to keep things moving. She still laughs sometimes, but not at my jokes. Not like before. One evening we were at a company event, just a casual mixer at a downtown bar with a few of my employees and their partners. Claire showed up late, looking incredible. Everyone noticed, especially Ryan. Ryan was one of my newer hires. Young, confident, always eager to impress. He'd been with us for a little over a year, and he'd quickly become a solid member of the team. Reliable, energetic. I never had any issues with him until that night. He and Claire talked more than anyone else. At first, I thought nothing of it. She was friendly with a lot of my employees, especially the younger ones. But the way he looked at her, it felt familiar. And when she laughed at something he said, a loud, open laugh I hadn't heard from her in months, it hit me in a place I wasn't ready to admit existed. Still, I didn't confront her. Didn't ask. I told myself not to be that guy. The insecure, jealous husband reading too much into nothing. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was projecting. Maybe they were just getting along. But when I kissed her goodnight later that night, she turned her head just slightly, enough that my lips grazed her cheek instead of her mouth. She said nothing. Neither did I. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence between a stretch wider than I'd ever felt it before. There's a moment you reach in a marriage, not a blowout, not a crisis, just a slow, crawling dread that what you thought was solid is actually hollow. That was where I found myself. Every day felt like walking through a version of my life that looked exactly the same on the surface, but felt completely unfamiliar underneath. Claire still made her morning smoothies. I still packed my briefcase and left for the office. We still sat on the couch some nights watching TV. But it was all muted, like we were mimicking a life we used to actually live. The physical closeness between us had evaporated almost entirely. Not just intimacy, but simple things, touches on the arm, brushing past each other in the kitchen, her leaning her head on my shoulder during a movie. It was like she didn't want to be touched at all, like my presence now repelled her more than it comforted her. I told myself not to take it personally, that maybe she was stressed or overwhelmed. But I also knew her well enough to know when something deeper was happening. And this wasn't stress. This was distance, deliberate and sharp. At work, I kept my head down. I poured everything I had into the business because it was the only place I still felt like myself. But even there, things started to feel strange. Ryan, my employee, the same one who did Claire laughing like a teenager at that company event, had grown a little too familiar around me. He used to be deferential, professional. Lately, he acted like we were equals. A few comments here and there that rubbed me wrong, subtle digs, small power moves. It wasn't enough to act on, but enough to notice. Enough to make me wonder what I was missing. Claire, meanwhile, seemed to be thriving. She looked better than ever, new wardrobe pieces showing up almost weekly, nails always freshly done, energy in her step that hadn't been there in a long time. I wanted to believe she was doing it for herself. Maybe she was. But it was hard to ignore how little of that energy was directed toward us. She didn't seem interested in connecting. She didn't ask how my day was unless I brought it up. If I made dinner plans or suggested a night out, she'd suddenly remember a prior commitment or say she wasn't feeling up for it. I kept telling myself not to jump to conclusions, to stay grounded, to believe in the life we'd built. But some nights, I'd sit on the back deck alone, staring into the dark, and all I could feel was this quiet, gnawing sense that I was the only one still trying. I didn't want to be suspicious. I didn't want to start checking her phone or her schedule. I wasn't built that way. I've always believed people show you who they are, eventually. You just have to pay attention. And the more I watched Claire, the more I realized she wasn't showing me anything anymore. It was a Wednesday evening. Midweek, uneventful, like so many others lately. I'd gotten home late after a meeting ran long. The house was dim, quiet, and for a second, I thought maybe Claire wasn't home. But there she was, sitting at the dining table, arms crossed, bags by the front door. Not a suitcase, just 2 designer tote bags she used when we traveled. That was the first thing that hit me. She'd packed light. I dropped my keys into the bowl and looked at her. Hey, everything okay? She didn't answer right away. Just stared at me. Cold. Not angry. Not emotional. Just flat. Like I was some inconvenience she'd been waiting to get rid of. I'm leaving, she said. Calm. Controlled. I blinked. What? I'm done, Nate. I can't do this anymore. I walked over slowly, my mind racing to catch up. Claire, what are you talking about? Where are you going? She gave a short, sharp laugh. To someone who actually makes me feel something. Someone who isn't just drifting through life and calling it love. I didn't speak. Couldn't. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. She stood, walked toward the door, and paused just long enough to deliver the line that would rattle around in my head for months. I need a real man. Not a loser who's too blind to see how boring his life has become. Then she picked up her bags and walked out. Just like that. No tears. No explanations. No fighting. Just a clean exit like she'd been planning it for weeks. I stood there for a long time. The door still half open, her perfume lingering in the air. I didn't run after her. I didn't call. I didn't even close the door right away. I just stared at the space where she'd stood, trying to understand how someone could be so casual while blowing up everything we built. For hours, I wandered the house in a fog. Her closet was mostly empty. She'd taken her favorites, left behind what didn't matter. The framed photo from our wedding still sat on our nightstand, untouched. I didn't know who she'd gone to. I didn't ask. All I knew was that she'd walked out of our life like it meant nothing. And the worst part? She looked relieved when she did it. For the first few days after Claire left, I didn't tell anyone. I kept my head down, showed up to work, stayed quiet at meetings, went through the motions. I didn't want the sympathy. I didn't want the questions. Part of me was still holding on to the faint hope that maybe she just needed space, that maybe this was temporary. But by the end of the week, I knew better. I'd seen how she left. You don't walk away like that unless you're already gone. It was over drinks the following weekend that everything clicked into place. A couple of friends invited me out, saying I looked like I could use a night to reset. I agreed. I figured a beer, some small talk. Anything would be better than sitting in that empty house with her side of the bed untouched. We met at a place near the office, low-key, familiar. I didn't bring up Claire. I didn't plan to. But my friend Dan did. So, you okay? He asked, leaning in a little. I gave the safest answer I could. Not really, but I'm managing. He hesitated. I didn't want to say anything until you brought it up, but you know she's with someone, right? I felt my grip tighten around the glass. I figured. She didn't exactly leave that part vague. Dan looked away for a second, then back at me. It's Ryan. At first, the name didn't register. I just stared at him. Ryan. Yeah, Ryan. From your team. Your guy in dispatch. My stomach dropped. He kept talking, slowly, like he was trying to soften the blow. They've been seen together. Holding hands, grabbing lunch, coming out of the same building more than once. People are talking. I didn't want to believe it either, but, yeah, it's real. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mind was sprinting back through every strange glance, every too casual interaction, every time she'd laughed a little too hard at one of his jokes. The office mixer. The changed behavior. The sudden distance. It all lined up now. I just hadn't wanted to see it. She'd left me for him. A man I hired. A man I paid. A man who sat across from me in weekly meetings and smiled like he had nothing to hide. Claire hadn't just cheated. She'd humiliated me. And as the shock gave way to a slow, rising burn in my chest, I realized something even worse. She didn't expect me to do anything about it. But she was wrong. The next morning, I sat at my desk with a cup of black coffee and Ryan's file open in front of me. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. I wasn't rushing, wasn't acting on impulse. I had already let the hurt wash over me. Now there was just silence, and in that silence, clarity. He was scheduled for a meeting with me that afternoon, routine check-in, nothing unusual. I didn't reschedule. I didn't give him the courtesy of a heads up. I wanted to look him in the eye when I took back what he'd stolen. He walked in right on time, casual, relaxed, probably thinking this was another ordinary day. He didn't even sit before I told him to close the door behind him. He froze, sensing the tone, then obeyed. I leaned forward and looked at him, really looked. The smugness he used to wear around me, That cocky air I'd ignored for months was still there, just beneath the surface. But it cracked the second I said his name with weight. "You're done here," I said. He blinked. "Excuse me." "You're fired, Ryan. Effective immediately. I want your badge, your laptop, and your keys on my desk by the end of the hour. You'll be escorted out. Do not come back." He opened his mouth like he was about to argue, but I didn't let him speak. I didn't need to hear excuses or denials. I wasn't here to listen. "You disrespected me in every possible way," I continued, my voice cold but calm. "Not just as your employer. As a man. As someone who gave you a shot. You don't just lose a job today. You lose everything that came with being under my roof, around my people. And you can explain that to her." He stood there frozen, then nodded stiffly. There was no fight in him. Just shame. I watched him walk out, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Not because the pain was gone, but because I had reclaimed my dignity. Claire showed up the next day. She wasn't smug anymore. Her confidence was gone. She didn't knock, just let herself in like she still lived there. I was sitting on the couch, finishing a cup of coffee, calm as ever. She stood in the doorway looking smaller than I remembered her ever looking. "He told me what happened," she said. I nodded once. "I bet he did." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. "I didn't think you'd react like this. You thought I'd just sit here," I said. "You thought I'd just take it." She stepped forward. "I made a mistake. I didn't move. You made a choice." There was a silence between us then, a heavy, full of all the things she wanted to say, and all the things I would never care to hear. Finally, she asked the question she hadn't dared ask until now. "Can we talk? Try to fix this." I stood, walked to the door, and held it open. "There's nothing here for you anymore." She looked at me with wide eyes, like she truly couldn't believe I meant it. But I did. I meant every word. She left with nothing. No money, no fallback, no sympathy. She'd burned the bridge behind her, and for the first time, I didn't feel like the one left standing in the ashes. The silence after she left was different this time. Not the cold, empty quiet I'd been drowning in before, but something cleaner, steadier. Like the noise had finally been cleared out, and now I could hear myself think again. The house felt different without her. Not lonelier, just honest. I wasn't pretending anymore. There was no performance, no strained conversation, no walking on eggshells. Just me, Scout, a few podcasts, and the sound of life slowly returning to its proper pace. I took a week off from work. Not because I couldn't face the office. After Ryan's exit, things actually felt more solid than they had in a while, but because I needed to reset. I drove up to the mountains, stayed in a small cabin I used to rent before Claire and I met. No TV, no schedule, just books, fresh air, and space to sort out the wreckage in my head. I didn't wallow. I didn't spiral. I journaled, cooked simple meals, and watched the sunrise with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. When I came back, I started making changes. I updated the house not to erase her, but to take it back. I sold the bed we used to share and bought something new. Repainted the walls in the hallway. Donated the furniture she picked out that never felt like me. I reopened the kitchen, took down the minimalist shelving she insisted on, and brought in warmth again. It stopped being our home and became mine. And with every decision I made, I felt a little more like the man I used to be before I let her take up too much space. Then I met Julie. It wasn't dramatic or sweeping. I didn't fall into her arms or try to convince myself I was ready for anything serious. I met her at a mutual friend's backyard party. Someone brought her along, and we ended up next to each other at the grill. She complimented my technique. We started talking, and before I knew it, the sun had set and we were still standing there, laughing over plates of food we'd barely touched. Julie was different, grounded, easy to talk to. She didn't ask about my past right away, and when I told her bits of it weeks later, she didn't flinch. She didn't try to fix it or analyze it. She just listened. And that was all I needed. She's not a replacement. I'm not rushing toward anything. But being with her feels like breathing after being underwater too long. There's no tension, no confusion, just presence. I still have hard days. I still replay things sometimes when the house gets too quiet. But I'm not angry anymore. I'm not looking back. I'm not wondering what I could have done differently. Because I know now sometimes, losing what you thought you needed is the only way to find what you actually deserve. A year ago, if you'd told me this was where I'd end up, standing on my own, without Claire, without Ryan, without the version of life I thought I was building, I would have laughed. Or maybe panicked. Everything back then felt so fixed, so tightly wound to the identity I'd crafted over time. Husband, boss, provider, partner. The idea of all of that collapsing? It would have terrified me. But now, standing in the backyard with a beer in hand, watching the grill smoke curl into the evening air, I feel calm. Not euphoric. Not triumphant. Just at peace. Julie's inside with a couple of friends from her book club. She'll be out soon, probably teasing me for overcooking the steaks. I'll pretend to be offended, and she'll roll her eyes and laugh. It's easy with her. There's no power struggle. No hidden games. Just two people showing up every day because they want to, not because they have to. Claire tried texting again a month ago. One of those vague, sentimental messages, just wondering how you're doing. I think about you sometimes. I didn't respond. There's nothing left to say. She made her choices, and I've already lived the consequences. I won't go back to a world where I have to guess whether I matter. Where someone can look me in the eye and still lie without blinking. Ryan? Last I heard, he was bouncing between gigs, unable to hold anything steady. His name doesn't come up at work anymore. He's a ghost in that chapter of my life, and that's exactly where he belongs. What I've learned through all of this is something I wish I'd understood earlier. Peace doesn't come from keeping things together. It comes from letting go of what's tearing you apart. For too long, I mistook comfort for connection. I believed that if I kept giving, kept trying, kept holding on, the love would return. But real love doesn't have to be chased down. It doesn't hide behind cold shoulders or slip away during errands. Real love stands still. It shows up. It speaks honestly. It fights with you, not against you. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not bitter. I'm not hoping Claire feels regret, or that Ryan loses more than just a job. None of that matters. I've rebuilt my life with intention this time. Every choice, every relationship, every boundary crafted from experience, not fear. This story started with betrayal, with silence, with slow-burning suspicion. But it ends here, on a quiet evening, with a full heart and an open future. And honestly, that's more than I ever thought I'd get.